Hello, welcome to another episode of Mr. Bench's Book Reviews. What's in the box today? Today we've got Mr. Clumsy by Roger Hargreaves. This is a Mr. Men book. Here we go. Mr. Clumsy, there is green, waving, mustachioed, slightly dishevelled. He's not called Mr. Dishevelled. So let's see how clumsy this Mr. Man really is. It was a rather nice morning. In the sky the sun was up, shining. In the trees the birds were up, singing. But in a rather scruffy house in the middle of a field, somebody wasn't up. Can you guess who that somebody might be? Probably going to be Mr. Clumsy, isn't it? His alarm clock went off. There's a picture of the scruffy house. Mr. Men books, in case you don't know, they always have a picture on the right and text on the left. So I shall show the pictures normally. They don't show the sun or the birds, but I'll take the author's word for it. Mr. Clumsy woke up, well there you go, or maybe the sun and the birds just had alarm clocks that were set slightly earlier, and reached out an arm to switch off his alarm clock, and knocked it onto the floor. Whoops, he said, that's the third alarm clock I've broken this week. Mr. Clumsy, as you might have guessed, was a rather clumsy fellow. Yes, there he is, just about to knock off his alarm clock. One thing of note, it's not that important, but on the cover they put a dot after Mr. Dot Clumsy, but in the actual book they don't, they just write Mr. Space Clumsy. I think it's probably easier to read on balance without the dots, so I don't really mind that. Though you do wonder. He was a rather clumsy fellow. He got out of bed and switched on the radio. The knob came off in his hand. Whoops, he said. That's the second radio I've broken this month. Okay, so he doesn't break radios at quite the same rate. He breaks alarm clocks. Maybe he just replaces the whole radio just because the knob comes off. He went downstairs. The postman had been, and there was a letter waiting for Mr. Clumsy lying on his doormat. He picked it up and went into his kitchen. First things first, he said, and took a slice of bread out of his bread bin and popped it into his toaster. Now, he thought, I wonder who this letter is from. Now, this is quite funny because it just said he went downstairs, but then the picture shows him stumbling down the stairs in a rather clumsy fashion, which is obviously in keeping with his character. But actually in the text there he hasn't done anything clumsy, which is kind of cool. One thing of interest, it says first things first, which is an expression you're probably familiar with. Here it says first things as a plural first. So the first things are first. I'd always understood that upon hearing as first thing apostrophe as first, so first the first thing is first. But here there seem to be multiple things being first. You would have to look up which. Well, I mean, you could survey people, ask them what they think they're saying when they say that, or you could look up how it's normally written. But if you look up how it's normally written, you may be disproportionately surveying people in like the proofreading community who have their way of doing things, and it's possible that the public at large may think they're saying something quite different. Anyway, his first thing was putting bread. Well, no, he did have two things. He took a slice of bread bin out of his bread bin and he popped it into his toaster. Okay, now he's going to look at the letter. He looked at the letter in his hand. I like it when you know what's going to happen. It's quite nice, it helps the book flow. But the letter wasn't in his hand, oh dear. What was in his hand was a slice of bread. I don't understand it, he said. Where's the letter gone? Can you guess where the letter had gone? That's right. He'd put the letter in the toaster instead of the bread. And there it was, browning nicely. Whoops, he said, fishing it out. Ouch, he said, dropping it. It's hot. So a lot going on that page. They have this thing where they talk to the reader, like they did that first page. Can you guess who that somebody might be? And here, can you guess where the letter had gone? So it's very much encouraging the reader to think, oh, what's going to happen? I did guess that he was going to look at the letter, but they didn't ask me if I was going to guess that. Yeah, and whoops seems to be something of a catchphrase, as well as ouch. I think he's only said ouch once, but he said whoops a few times. This is quite... I mean, Mr. Men are drawn quite simply, but he looks particularly vacant there as he's staring at the bread. And I like the way the bread is very white, so you can see it hasn't been in the toaster. No, done well. So, and you can see the lines coming off the toaster, indicating that the letter is browning nicely. Oh dear, it's a funny picture. Before you've even read. Mr. Clumsy bent down to pick the letter up, but in doing so he banged his forehead on his kitchen table, and in doing so he fell forwards and got his head stuck in the bread bin. Yes, that's the bread bin. Traditionally, bread bins aren't just big bins that see bread on them. They're more like containers up on a shelf or on top of the fridge, maybe. But here you go, he has a bread bin there. I guess it's easy to get your head stuck in that. All of which wasn't surprising, really. As we said, he was a rather clumsy fellow. In fact, he was a very clumsy fellow. Actually, and this is quite a typical Mr. Men thing, he was the clumsiest person in the world. Mr. Clumsiest. This is quite funny the way you can see the, like, I guess that's the straggly hair, or possibly remnants of his moustache sticking out the bread bin. So you can tell it's Mr. Clumsy, and not one of the other green Mr. Men. That very same morning, after he managed to get the bread bin off his head, Mr. Clumsy went to town. Shopping. That's nice, that's the same structure as on the first page. In the sky the sun was up, shining, in the trees the birds were up, singing. And now we have, he went to town, shopping. First things first, he said, so that's another of his catchphrases. And he went into the bank to get some money. Well, he did one thing. He's quite happy there, and he's not tripping over. So he doesn't have a clumsy incident on that page. That's one of the few pages where everything goes well. Oh dear, but this one doesn't. And somehow, while he was in the bank, Mr. Clumsy, while he was writing a cheque, managed to spill ink all over the bank manager. Whoops, said Mr. Clumsy. Cheques are a bit old-fashioned now, but this is obviously... I'll give you the publication date, 1978. Seems to be copyright. So fairly old, yes. Whoops, said Mr. Clumsy. He went into the butcher's. Morning, butcher, he said cheerily. So he's not letting these things dampen his mood, which is nice. Here's the butcher with these stripy aprons. Also mustachioed, but his moustache is clearly much better kept than Mr. Clumsy. He is beaming though, I mean cheerily, and he's really grinning his head off. It's a real passion for life. Oh, and then he somehow managed to trip over his shoelaces. Well, they had been untied. That was quite good. It's one of these things you could have seen coming. And somehow managed to fall into the butcher's shop window. I guess he means from the inside into the display. I guess he means not smash glass all himself. And somehow managed to finish up with a string of sausages around his neck. Whoops, he said. As I'm saying whoops, you can see the mouth is formed into a circle. That's the oh. It's quite good detail. And there's this... Quite interestingly, it says a string of sausages around his neck. Mr. Men, famously, do not have necks. except perhaps Mr. Dizzy. If you look very closely, he has this kind of, certainly, well, you can't really see that. But Mr. Dizzy certainly has a kind of secondary bulge that would make up the head. But Mr. Clumsy, not very necked, but they just put the sausages around his head. So I guess that counts as his neck. See, in my book, I have a load of whales, and there's a thing with medals. I don't really, I don't go into details about where the medals would be hung. And there's another book I've read, a German one, where I think they claim that whales don't have necks. Well, there's some joke about it. So not all mammals have obvious necks, even if there is some sort of underlying skeletal structure with neck bones. And Clumsy is no different, and that doesn't stop you getting strings of sausages wrapped around yourself. Mr. Clumsy's next call was the supermarket. Well, disaster waiting to happen there with one of those soup cans. Just inside the door there was a huge pyramid pile of cans of soup. Pyramid pile? Well, you can imagine what happened, can't you? We're imagining now, we're not guessing. Exclaimed Mr. Clumsy. And that's nice, look, is it closed mouth, and his mouth is closed. So they've really gone into detail with the shape of the lips, depending on what he's saying. Soup would be nice for supper. And he picked up a can. Not a can from the top of the pile, oh no, not Mr. Clumsy. Well, it is a huge pyramid pile, it's not easy to reach the top. Blame the supermarket stacking staff. Oh no, not Mr. Clumsy. Whoops, said Mr. Clumsy, and went on his way, rubbing his head. Now again, that's quite nice. Well, a bit like the one where he stumbles down the stairs. I think I have another edition of this where it actually says he stumbled down the stairs. I don't think I just made that up. This may be a... It was reprinted in 1998. It's possible the original says he stumbled down the stairs, but here they are letting the pictures do a lot of the work. No, it doesn't say he picked up a can and the whole pyramid pile fell down all over him. It just says whoops, and then the picture, obviously the anticipation on the previous page, almost makes you feel like you're part of the story because you're not having to be told everything, you're intuiting lots of it. And again, whoops, round mouth. Very good, Mr. Clumsy. Rubbing his head, yes, and you can see one can in particular struck him on his head. On his way home, he called in at the farm for some eggs, and somehow, that's another recurring structure, while, yeah, somehow, while, that's come up quite a lot. While he was crossing the farmyard, he managed to trip up. Yeah, it's managed as well. And then he was tripping. So he's in the action of tripping, yeah. And somehow, as he was falling, he managed to grab hold of the farmer. Well, actually sounds like a good thing. And somehow, that's as he was falling there, not while he was falling. So they've changed it there. So oh, sorry, I have an alarm going off. I'll pause. Okay, I'm back. Hopefully that wasn't too ugly a cut. Just saying, somehow as he was falling, normally they say somehow come a while, and it's somehow as, so maybe they didn't want to overdo the repetition too much. He managed to grab hold of the farmer, and somehow they both managed to finish up in the duck pond. Splash! Whoops, said Mr. Clumsy, as is his wont. Let's not picture them in the pond. They vary. Sometimes they show him like after the incident, there's with the sausages, and sometimes they show the moment of clumsiness. Ah, there they are in the duck pond. Okay. Please, said the farmer as they sat together in the duck pond. It's quite funny that they don't get out, they just sit there in a chat. I mean, Mr. Clumsy's probably used to it, maybe he always lets it settle. You know, if you're panicking to try to sort things out constantly, it can almost make them less pleasant, whereas if you just accept your lot and your wet posterior, then maybe that's how he copes. Anyway, the farmer doesn't seem as used to this. In future, can I deliver your eggs to you? The implication there is that he doesn't want to be cast into a duck pond every time Mr. Clumsy wants eggs. That's extraordinarily kind of you, replied Mr. Clumsy. Don't mention it, muttered the farmer. Extraordinary, or extraordinarily in this case, is quite a common word in Mr. Men books. Comes up quite a lot. Which is kind of nice because it's quite long and there's that like AO thing in the middle. So not the easiest word to read, I imagine. So for young readers, it's good that they can familiarise themselves with a word like that. Mr. Clumsy went home. First things first, he said, and went for a bath. See, that's just in one thing. But it's still written first things. Plural. Maybe I will. Do write in the comments what you think you're saying when you say first things first. I would be interested to know. Here, he went for a bath, but look, he's not in the bath, he's in a basket. But as he was stepping into his bath, his foot somehow managed to slip on the soap, and he somehow managed to turn a somersault, and he somehow managed to land with his head in the linen basket. Whoops, said a muffled voice. Yeah, so again, but, and then somehow managed. Does a lot of this. Poor Mr. Clumsy, whoops. Later, he went downstairs for supper. Soup from the supermarket, sausages from the butcher's, and eggs from the farm. Now, those are the things you got, aren't they? The other one was the bank, but he didn't really get anything edible there. Or rather, soup from the saucepan that had boiled over, sausages from the frying pan that had caught fire, and eggs, oh dear, very, very, very scrambled eggs. A normal Mr. Clumsy sort of supper. That was nice, he said, leaning back in his chair. There's another one where they set it up very nicely. He's enjoying himself, though. Look at him grinning. Crash! Well, whoops, said Mr. Clumsy. I think I'd better go to bed. And he did. Yeah, he did fall off the chair. Doesn't seem to have smashed it, necessarily. And that's the end of the story. Good night, Mr. Clumsy. Mr. Clumsy leaned over to turn off his bedside light. And, oh dear. Whoops. So I guess he knocked his light off. And that's quite sad in some ways, you know. There's no, like... Some of these Mr. Men books, there's some sort of development in the character. And they may start off clumsy, but then they become less clumsy, or they infect other people with their clumsiness. I'm using clumsy, there was a placeholder, whatever the adjective is. But this one, he's just very clumsy. And from start to finish, and the first thing he does upon awaking is breaking his alarm clock, and then they don't say it again, which I quite liked, that they didn't always say what had happened, but you could interpret it. And right at the end, he's clearly, well, presumably either knocked off his bedside light from his bedside table, or pulled and broken the string or something. What I do like is that he stays happy and cheery, doesn't panic, often grinning, very positive person, Mr. Positive Clumsy. I think he... Yeah, I mean, there are a few slightly odd things, like, getting the head stuck in the bread bin. That foreshadows getting the head stuck in the linen basket, obviously. But it is a bit of an odd place for a bread bin, but maybe bread bins used to be different. Maybe that's why they're called bins, because they used to stand on the floor like bins. And yeah, you had a lot of nice repetitions that kind of guided you through the story. I think that was a very strong effort from Hargreaves. Well done. And as I say, I don't think it's too sad, because you can clearly see that Mr. Clumsy doesn't let this sort of thing get him down. Enjoyed his dinner, and he got his soup, he did get his sausages, he has these little accidents, but at the end of the day, he's happy with his, I believe he said, nice dinner, nice supper. So So yeah, well done Clumsy. And well done Hargreaves. And as I say, do let me know what you think in the comments, particularly regarding first things first, and I'll see you next time. Bye!